Um,
Yeah.
all right, so we should get started. Again, thank you guys for being here. This is our last class in this session. So I know we're going to do this again in January, though, starting at the end of January. So keep your eye out and sign up for that. Again, if keep yourself on mute just so that we don't get background noise and we can focus on the people who are talking. And I'll turn it over to Ken. Thanks.
A little thing on the mute. If you mute it and you just press, if you're on a computer, you press your space bar, it unmutes you temporarily, and then when you let go of the space bar, it mutes you back. Little shortcut. Okay, so Anne Frank parallel stories, or technically hashtag Anne Frank parallel stories, is that little pound sign in front of her name there. Before we get into any real discussion, anybody have any overall impressions or feelings about the film? Just in general, not specifically about any of our questions or anything?
Just a quick general question. Is it my sound system or is it yours, Ken, that's a little off? I don't know if other people are having a problem with it.
Hearing me?
Yes.
I don't know. Jill, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's a little echoey.
It's a little echoey. Okay, let me see. Maybe I can change my setting here. I could put in, well, I don't have them here, but I could put in headphones. That sometimes gives an echo. Let me just see here on my settings. Well, if somebody wants to make a general comment, I'll play around while you're doing that. How's that? Joyce had a hand that I can see.
My comment is probably pretty personal, but I was in almost every one of those places that was on the film. And so it connected me in a whole different way. So, I was in Amsterdam last year, I was in Terezin, I was in Prague, I was in Poland, and I have sort of followed that circuit. So it was pretty amazing for me. That's it.
Actually was in all of those places in 2018.
2019 too. 2019. Oh, who was?
Yeah, I was in 2018. I was there in 2018. We did like up the Danube kind of thing, and
yeah, me too.
All through. And my grandparents on my father's side were born in Austria-Hungary, but it became Czechoslovakia, and then they came to the United States, and now it's Slovakia. So we visited Slovakia, Czech Republic, Terezin, all those kinds of things. And I mean, there's just constant reminders throughout there.
It's just very different after you've been there to absorb all the things that you hear. I mean, I happen to watch a lot of stuff about the Holocaust, and I had no one in my family who was died in Shoah. But it's really different once you've been there and you hear people talking about it and you've walked those walks, and then you see it on a movie and you go, I know where that was. I was standing right there, so I think it was pretty amazing.
Well, it makes me think of a question that's not on our list of questions, but I sort of hinted at in the first and second films, which is, I think there are some connections between the three films, but they're not obvious connection. Well, there's one sort of obvious one, but they're not totally obvious. So did anybody see any kind of themes running through the three films?
Same theme in all three?
Well, something that runs through the three films, other than the fact that they're about people who wrote books, which is the really obvious thing. I thought there was something else that sort of connected them. When I was putting together the three films, I thought, this is a kind of thread that runs through the films, maybe. You wouldn't see it until you watched all three films, but...
Outcasts.
Outcasts?
People that are marginalized.
Marginalized. Well, I don't know about Joan Didion.
Her subjects. Like
wrote about, she might have written
Francisco
about
and the whole drug scene and whatever.
Yeah, she might have written about people who are marginalized.
I mean,
the obvious connection is that, of course, they all wrote memoir, although Didion wrote other things too, but they all wrote memoirs, and that's kind of a clue as to what I saw. But maybe I'm the only one who saw it, but
I mean, I just related, I'm not sure about Joan Didion, but the first and the third were current to what's happening today. That was the theme I saw. I mean, first was political about what is and what's not, and this third one was about people being held captive, and we're all being held captive right now. So that was my connection with the first and third. I have to think about the second.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to it at the end. Maybe you'll think of it as we go along. So hopefully everybody got the sheet this time. Did anybody not get the sheet? I'm not sure if Carolyn's saying she did or she didn't, but hopefully everyone got it. So this is an unusual film because, you know, there are a lot of films about Anne Frank and pretty well-known story. And so why make another film? And from what I was able to read, and there's not a whole lot out there about the filmmakers or the film actually. They're Italian journalists and new to filmmaking. They made a couple films together, but mostly TV things. And because Anne was turning 90 in 2019, and because it was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of some of the camps, they thought this would be a good time to do it. And the approach they wanted to take was, there's probably a whole new generation of kids who are unfamiliar with this story and who maybe can't relate to the story. Maybe it just seems like, you know, something that happened a long, long time ago. It doesn't happen today. You know, it's not really relevant to their lives. It's interesting that the narrator is Helen Mirren, who's obviously not a young person. And then they put in this character of Katerina, who's on her Instagram account and posting as she goes from place to place. So there's kind of this old person and this young person relating the story, which I thought was an interesting approach. But the other thing is that, you know, their idea was, look, the story's been told and we can certainly address the story to a degree, but what we really want to tell are these parallel lives, other girls who went through the same thing but survived, and how similar or dissimilar the event was, and what would have happened if Anne had survived. You know, who would she be today? I mean, like, one of the questions when I used to teach the book to middle school kids, I used to say, do you think if Anne had survived, any of us would be reading this book? What would be your answer to that question? If Anne had survived the camps, would we ever have seen the book? Would it ever have made the light of day?
Maybe not the same way. Maybe it would have made the light of day because it's such a full account. It's so big.
I mean, how many diaries end up getting published? Not many. I mean, there are some that have been, you know, become famous and things. But my feeling is that probably we never would have heard of Anne Frank. I don't know that it would have ever become something. It would just been another story, and she wrote the story. Maybe she just shared it with her children or something like that. If you're a Philip Roth reader, he has a book called The Ghostwriter. And in The Ghostwriter, he meets a woman that he suspects is Anne Frank and that she survived somehow but has been hiding because she didn't want the attention, which is, of course, a fantasy, but an interesting approach to it, kind of thing. So what else we have here? There were some things that I learned, even though I've taught this a number of times, that, like, in Holland, 75% of Dutch Jews were deported and eventually killed. I didn't realize the number was that large. And last year, actually, I was in Holland, but we didn't go to anything that had anything to do with the Holocaust other than Anne Frank's house, which is actually not terribly, I shouldn't say impressive. It's not what you would expect, because it's basically bare rooms. I don't know that everybody picked up on it, but where Helen Mirren is a reproduction. It's a set that was built to look like what Anne's room might have looked like with the two beds and things. But when the girl walks in at the end, when Katerina actually gets there and walks in, that empty house with just photos on the wall, that's what Anne Frank's house looks like. And you don't go there and say, like, wow, what a great display. In fact, I could see some people going through and saying, I was kind of disappointed. There wasn't a whole lot to see there and everything. No, there isn't. That's kind of not the point of it. But so everybody sort of knows the story. How many people have read the book? Just wave your hand if you've ever read the book.
Ages ago.
It could be ages ago. It's okay. I mean, it's very commonly read, and I mean, I read it when I was, I think, 13. like junior high school kind of thing. And it made a big impression on me. I always felt a little guilty because I think I had a little crush on Anne Frank. And, you know, that felt like, ooh, that's wrong. But I did. I thought if I knew her, I would have kind of hung out with her because she liked writing and she wanted to be a writer and she liked movies and things like that. And I thought there was kind of a connection there. But I've taught the book a number of times, and it almost always made an impression on students. And it's taught in a lot of different places too, besides school. A lot of Jewish organizations teach it and that sort of thing. And it got kids into talking about whether they would ever keep a diary or a journal and what the point of it is and what could it do for other people. I think, Joyce, you mentioned the fact that the films all seem to be sort of contemporary in some way. And there's a part I wrote there where Helen Mirren says that the advent of wars in Syria, Libya, Iraq, and the immigration issue that's happening in Europe, it's so easy to start pointing your finger at different races, different tribes, different cultures, different people and say, you're to blame for my problems. It's not like what happened has totally disappeared from the planet. You know, there may not be anything of the magnitude of the Holocaust, but certainly there are connections that you should be able to make, unfortunately, in every age to what happens to the people in that story. And there are parallel stories and also parallels. I also put a link there to Anne Frank House, is annefrank.org. There's a lot of things that you can get on there that are really interesting. Okay, let's take a look at some of the questions that we have here. First question was about the filmmakers who, as we said, were motivated by the anniversaries and wanted to make a film that was informative but be more relevant to young people. So you were not the target audience for this film. Not that I think it misses the mark for you, but you are not the target audience. And their connecting motif was to use this young woman who's posting pictures and thoughts on Instagram as she tours Anne's life. And even the film's title is #Anne Frank. So you might not have been the target audience, but did this approach work or distract for you? Did you like that approach? And you can also think about if you have children or grandchildren who are more like high school, middle school age, do you think it would have worked for them? I'd be curious how students would react to this film. I've never used the film with students, so I don't know. Reactions
I like the approach because years ago, I started to watch Schindler's List and I didn't get far into it. I said, I can't watch this. I cannot watch, you know, man's inhumanity to man. And so I've never tried to continue watching it. This was perfect because it gave you all the different viewpoints and it showed you the little clips of the horrors, but not enough to destroy you and, you know, to allow you to watch the whole thing. And I watched it last night right before I went to bed and I slept. So, and it was disturbing, but not, you know, and I try to protect myself from terrible images like 9/11. I did not watch the TV to keep seeing that same horror over and over. I just block it out. So I think this is very watchable. And, you know, I learned so much. I had no idea that 22 countries were involved. It's just, so I think it's a great documentary, and Helen Mirren reading from the diary with, you know, with all that emotion. I think it was just perfect. And the young girl, you know, doing the tour and talking to Anne on Instagram was, yeah, it was amazing.
Jennifer.
Yes, and I will second that, Marilyn. I think that it was done very well, not with too much details about the horrors that happened there. You didn't need that, but enough to make you curious to ask questions, especially for children. So it was very well made, I think.
Yeah, I think the idea that they were aiming for a younger audience and maybe thinking it would be shown in schools and things, you have to be so careful now. I mean, I've been out of the K-12 classroom for a while and in college, and, you know, a lot more liberal there. But I mean, teachers have to think about trigger warnings, as they call them. Like if you're going to read a novel and people die in it, or a dog dies in it, you have to sort of warn the kids, that, you're going to be reading this. And it's like, I don't know. So, I mean, I've seen some of the Holocaust documentaries that are very graphic. Like Marilyn was saying, I could see you having bad dreams from these things. I remember seeing something when I was a student in school, and it was like a bulldozer pushing bodies into a mass grave. And I was like, oh, I didn't want to, I turned my head away. I didn't want to watch it, kind of thing. And I'm sure to a degree that was the point. I mean, it was supposed to shock me, and it did. But I think they lightened up a little on that, thinking of who the audience would be, but didn't skip it. It's still there, and there's still a few shots like that, but not to the degree that they could have. So. And the framing device, the framing device distracting to you, having this girl in? I thought she was kind of unobtrusive, but I could see some people thinking that it was kind of corny, maybe even. The Katerina. She's an actress, by the way. She's an actress playing that part. She's not just some kid who went around. Joyce?
It didn't bother me, and it didn't enlighten me to see her there. I felt like if I was a kid today learning about the Holocaust, which is so hard to absorb, I think, sometimes I think maybe being together with survivors, like a young person connecting with an old person, a survivor, might be have more depth to it than she might have gotten more out of it if she was with a group of people, but I mean, I know it was a film technique, but I don't know that she would have ever absorbed what was going on then by herself. So I know maybe she wasn't meant to be by herself in real life. But I don't know, it's pretty hard to really understand without direct knowledge of it exactly what happened. I don't know, maybe it's.
Well, I found the movie very pertinent to my life. The girl and the hashtags and the whatever she was writing about was kind of incidental, but first of all, July 15th, 1944, where she mentions in the diary that the clouds are darkening and I still have hope. I thought that was really beautiful. The thing that touched me even more was that that's my birthday. And so I say to myself, I'm glad I was born. Maybe the idea is to carry on her work of trying to make it a better world. The second thing was that my daughter, when she went to Northwestern years ago, actually played Anne Frank. And the little room that she had was really emphasized in her interactions with the other people in the apartment. It was a tremendous thing for me to see, first of all, my daughter, but second of all, what was going on with Anne Frank. But I think the having Anne Frank's contemporaries, whether back then or even now, was very pertinent, and each of them had something that was truly amazing in terms of how she survived. How they survived, not how she survived. So I thought it was a touching movie, and I think it's necessary. I think it would be.
Stan froze up a little bit there. Okay, Stan, you froze up. I don't know something with your connection. Maybe we'll get back.
Did you lose me?
Yep,
Yeah,
you're back. You're back. We lost you for a second there.
Okay, yeah, people say that about me all the time. Man, where are you, man? So basically what I was saying was, I think it's for everybody. The movie was for everybody. And anybody can get something out of the movie as to the pertinence to the world today, the pertinence to not scapegoating. Yeah, that's what I think about it.
Well, my second part of that question is maybe we should view the Instagram post that she does as a kind of updated version of writing in the diary, Dear Kitty. And I wonder if I was teaching it to students of Anne's age at this point, I think a question you could ask is, let's say you were in Syria or one of those countries now, and you were a young girl, and you were sort of trapped in your home because you couldn't go out because of the war, not trapped in the house like COVID, trapped in the house, but really trapped in the house. Would you keep a diary, or would a student today be more likely to have a blog or be posting on Instagram or Twitter or something like that? And so in a way, I think the Katerina character was kind of, I don't know, a little bit imitating the Dear Kitty idea. I mean, she actually did write a couple of her posts to Anne, which was interesting too. But I think that might have been the idea. I did not find it obtrusive, the device. You know, it didn't dominate the film, so you could just kind of fluff past it kind of thing. But I thought it was an interesting device, particularly for the audience. Raymond.
Hi there, everybody. So I blog, which is my diary, and I also a big fan of social media. So my first, I don't know, not instinct, but my first habit was to go look for Katerina Cat on Instagram to follow her, because I didn't.
And there's a bunch of them.
I didn't read about the film. Just I go into them cold, and then I read about them afterwards, and then discuss them with you all, which is great. Thank you. So I thought of Katerina as a person, you know, like somebody that they found who wanted to go on that journey, and not as an actress per se, you know, acting that part. So I thought it was a young woman on that journey from town to town, from the crematorium to the you know, to the hideout. So I liked her, you know, with what she said and how she said it. I mean, I know it was sort of acted out for the movie, but I didn't think of her as an actress. I thought of her as a person who we were watching. And I related to that because it's the modernization of, it's I was telling a friend, like, oh, Anne Frank would have been 90 this year. So that means 60 years ago. Like, okay, duh. She was 13 to 15, which is probably when I read the diary as a kid. I think in New York City schools, I think that's the time it's mandatory. So I read the book back 100 years ago when I was 15. I'm confusing myself with the math now. I read the book. I think it was a great update. I think it was well done. I liked the point of view. I liked the interaction with the social media. I thought it was it made it relevant to the new generation. I think it should be sort of mandatory. I think it's decidedly, sadly, scarily relevant in today's political times also, because we're not that far from. I mean, I tell my nephew, who's a Trumper, that I fully expect to be rounded up by the Gestapo. But thank you for choosing this, Kenneth. I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I thought it was a great update. I think everyone should watch it. I think it should be well viewed.
It might be,
I also liked about it. Who's that?
me. I just said it might be mandatory in some places.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not
don't
that
know either.
well in touch anymore, but I think one of the good things about it is that it's such a different approach that even if students have said, oh, we saw a film in fifth grade and they showed one at Hebrew school, and I think it's different enough that it might bring up other kinds of conversations, like what would a person today be doing if they were in Syria or Libya or something like that? Or, you know, is the story still relevant to today? And, you know, all that kind of thing. And I did learn some things, like I said, even though I've taught the book, I learned a couple of things in here that either I've forgotten or I never knew. So I thought that was well worth it. Anything else about Katerina, who, by the way, Raymond, I also looked up her on Instagram. There's like 4 people with that name now, and I don't think any of them are her. I also found the actress. I looked up who the actress was, and she has an Instagram, but It's just about her acting and that kind of thing. So it must have been an account they created, like a fake account kind of thing, to get it going. I don't even know if it was truly Instagram. It could have been all fake just for the film kind of thing. But I thought it was an interesting framing device. I see Jeannie, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually I liked that part of it. I liked her. I liked the young woman traveling around and posting this stuff. I thought that was interesting, and I also liked seeing the like third generation, the grandchildren. But I feel like within the documentary itself, in a way, it almost competed. Like I didn't find it didn't seem to augment. I mean, I was interested in both parts, but I felt like the grandchildren kind of weren't as important as they might have been had the young woman not been there also. Like, so I think it got diluted a little bit with those different opposing ways, although it could have been really, really interesting.
Well, that will make me jump to question number 5, because when I was thinking about the filmmaker question, which we always ask, how well did they blend? And I thought, oh my goodness, there actually is a lot in here. There's archival film, there are stills, there's Mirren's reading, there's the narration, which is sometimes Mirren, sometimes not. There's interviews, new ones, there's new location footage, and there's the Katerina story. Maybe there's too much going on in the film. Is that it, or is that what makes the film work? I see Raymond is saying no, and anybody, somebody new, hit that space bar and talk. Anybody? Okay, Raymond's back.
So I was glad to learn, although it doesn't work for me, the spacebar thing, but I do the Alt key plus A for audio. So that turns on and off, it toggles the mic. Alt A to toggle the audio mic, and Alt V to toggle the video camera. Okay, so spacebar didn't work for me. Apropos of all those different bits, I like them all and they all work for me. Love Helen Mirren. I mean, so, you know, I could feel her sadness about Anne's sadness, about the state of affairs in the universe, in the world sadness. I like the Katerina, Helen. I like the mixing of old footage, although it's a little gruesome, but it was real. It was, you know, it was archival of bodies that, you know, you have to know, you have to realize how it really was, not just read descriptions of it. And I like the way the 5, I think it was 5 women who are 90 something now, speaking in respectively Italian and French and German and
Yeah, I mean that
I don't
alone.
know if it was Polish or Czechoslovak.
Yeah, that alone kind of emphasized the idea that, you know, this wasn't just something that happened in one place, like in Germany or just in Holland, you know, people from all these different places, from France and from Italy and things like that, and the different languages and things, which I think is also good, kids to be exposed to all of that too. So, all right.
I'm just trying my space bar, and thank you. It's the first time using it. It works. It works for me.
Okay.
But as far as the events that took place, these people are alive right now. They have the numbers to prove it. And if anyone doesn't believe it, I don't know what else can be done about it, but it's real.
Well, and the other thing, of course, we're reminded is that they're all in their 90s, and it will not be that far in the future when there will be no survivors remaining to speak. I mean, there are all these huge projects to record survivors and get their stories down and everything like that. Steven Spielberg started a gigantic project after Schindler's List, which I also took me 3 shots to watch Schindler's List. But, you know, that's another thing, to record these stories and have these stories retold, which I think the film does pretty well. I think Stan might have been raising his hand there.
It's interesting. The fact that she was Jewish was not overwhelming, but you see, I saw little snippets of her being Jewish come in, and there was one particular moment where they focus in on Margot's and Anne Frank's tombstones if they would have been able to find their remains. And there's an inscription on there that we have in our synagogue for people who have passed away. So it's an everlasting memorial on the tombstone, but in the Jewish religion, we have, that's a saying, it goes something like, the candle of God shall light up our inner soul forever. And to me, that was particularly touching. I don't know if that answers any question that you have.
Well, as far as the blending, I mean, we've seen lots of films with the archival footage, and I don't know that there's any new archival footage here, so that maybe not. The stills, it always amazes me how many photos there are of Anne Frank. I mean, there's like a dozen that you see all the time, like the one that's on the cover of the book and things, but there are lots of photos of her, not so much when she gets to the secret annex and things like that, but there are lots and lots of photos of her. And I've always thought that if some archivist wanted to dig, somewhere she must have been caught in some footage, because one thing the Germans did is they document it with film and photography. There must be a photo of her at one of the camps or something like that. I'm sure somebody has tried to find it or something like that. But I mean, the stills, I think, worked really well. I mean, Mirren's reading, I think, was really effective. The new location footage in the interviews is certainly unique to this film. So I think this film does bring some things to light that maybe we hadn't seen before. So I thought the filmmakers did a good job with it. Like I said, they're not really filmmakers, they're journalists, and maybe it's very journalistic. The only other film that I could find that was sort of a big film was the Sabina Fedeli made a film about a documentary on Hitler's looting of art throughout Europe. So I guess she has some kind of connection to that whole story.
How did they get the video of her on the balcony there? Do you know?
Oh yeah, I've never. That's true. That's one that I have not seen. The one where they're looking up. It's a wedding, and Anne just happens to be hanging out the window and looking at the wedding. Yeah, I don't know where that one is. I have never seen that one before. You're right. That's a new one on me. But I'm sure people are always digging for more and more things about it. It's sort of like the Shakespeare archives. I mean, people are looking for any scrap of history about, William Shakespeare. I think Anne Frank probably has a pretty good number of entries in the library there. I don't know. I guess it's mentioned one of the questions about other films, because I'm sure everybody's seen at least one other film about Anne Frank of some kind or another. All right, so let's look at question
Hold on,
two.
wait,
Oh,
I think
somebody-
Carolyn had something to say.
Oh, Carolyn.
I was just going to say that one of the things that I really enjoyed were the personalities of the people who have survived. They were so different, and made you understand that, how, it wasn't like everybody was the same. Each of the, especially the French grandma, I fell in love with her. She had such a wonderful attitude. And I really enjoyed that. But the other thing I was going to say, I've never been, I wish I could have traveled to see the various camps, but the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. blew me out of the ground. So if you can't get to where the real thing is, that experience is quite something. I came home, I could not believe what a job they did with that museum.
I will
I
tell
went
you,
there
Carolyn,
the year that it opened,
me too.
and as we were entering and going in the gift shop, there was a bomb scare called in,
Oh, gee.
which I thought, holy crap. And they said, it happens all the time. We get it all the time.
So, Carolyn and others, I will tell you that there's one thing, if you have a chance during this crazy pandemic to do it, the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Manhattan at the Battery Park City, I've been taking classes with them through the whole pandemic, and they're fascinating. They have an exhibit that they had to close, but now it's reopened on a limited basis, and it's of Auschwitz, and it's amazing. It's amazing. So if you want to pursue on a limited basis, Stan, you're muted.
I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, we Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we went down there when a year or two ago, and we have friends whose parents survived the Holocaust, and it just so happens that when we went, her mother, a photograph of her mother was found in the museum that we didn't know about, and it was just unbelievable. It was yeah. So
Also, there's a big push. They call them the 2Gs, the 3Gs, the Descendants, because we're going to very soon have nobody left that was a survivor. So there's a whole bunch of people that are related and writing books about their grandparents, just like we saw in this movie. And one big family that's doing it is the Foer family, Foer, and the mother, who is I don't know if she calls it a 1G or a 2G, the child of a Holocaust survivor. The mother is incredible, and she wrote a book, and I didn't read the book, but I saw the interview with the mother, and that's really great too. So if anybody's
I say a few words. Hello?
Can I
You
just
hear
say there was a film, documentary-like film about.
Claire wanted to talk.
I know.
Claire,
I know. I want to say about the film.
Joyce, try,
It's a documentary on
Joyce, if you're still
PBS that
going,
they're running.
try muting and unmuting, maybe. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one getting it now. I'm saying
What's that?
it's showing me that it's slow. But
Hello?
Okay, Claire, I think, go ahead.
Okay. I had to come outside to talk because I have a man drilling in my house and I've been wanting to talk. And every time I went to go talk, he started drilling again. So I can't stay on here too long. That's why I want to talk fast and get back inside. First of all, I put in the chat room the actual New Jersey standard that Holocaust education is required in all social studies, not in all, in social studies classes in all public schools in New Jersey. This is fairly new. I mean, not like yesterday, but maybe 12 years ago, something like that, that was passed. So that's in there if anybody wants to read it. So yes, it is required in New Jersey schools. Secondly, being a New Jersey school public school teacher, I would say that students would much prefer watching and reading even Diary of Anne Frank than what we saw, because they would be bored by most of what the older women said. They just would, because it's not entertaining enough. Helen Mirren, she was, but they have to be still entertained. But they loved reading Diary of Anne Frank, and it does make a big impression upon them. Thirdly, they would like the hashtag part. At first, I was annoyed because I was trying to just listen to part of the movie while doing something, and I kept having to turn to read hashtags. But then I get used to it. It was very good. That was a nice. Back to the women, though. I think they were a big part of the whole documentary, of course, and added a great deal to it, and a lot of better understanding of what happened to people. I'd say. I don't know how many years ago, again, maybe within the past decade, but I don't know when. I did hear an author speak who was in the Holocaust and was a survivor, and she wrote a book about it, on which I purchased. Do not ask me the name now because I don't remember, but they a lot of them were doing speaking engagements around. In fact, I had colleagues, not in my school, but others, who had survivors come into the school and speak to them, and they said that was extremely powerful for the children. So now the second generation, is that they carry that on, that'll be great as well. Just like I heard Japanese American, that they wouldn't talk, the first generation wouldn't even talk about what they went through, but now their children are talking more and educating people more about it, because they didn't suffer it firsthand. And overall, I really learned things, as everyone else said, from the documentary. And you said that this was a memoir, and it's a memoir of 5 women being interviewed, right? It's not just one memoir, right? I mean, it's just bits and pieces that these journalists put together, correct?
muted, Ken.
no, I'm saying that Anne Frank's book is a
Oh,
memoir.
yes, Frank's
That all
memoir
3
was a
books are
memoir.
memoirs.
Oh, okay. I guess what you said, the
Not the
movies
film.
had in common, and the first Becoming was memoir of hers, and Joan Didion was kind of a memoir of hers with her picture A nephew, I believe, was helped him. So this was a little different, but they're very good. Good choices. Thank you. I'm going inside. Bye.
While I was clicking network connections there, was there somebody else who was trying to speak? Because I kind of lost you there for a minute. I had to switch servers.
I wasn't trying to speak, but I guess the passion in me is, you remember she read one of the last lines of the diary, which is, I still believe in the goodness, despite it all, I still believe in the goodness of people, I think it was.
Mm.
I actually have my Anne Frank book right here, and I can't find the line, but I remember reading that as a child, however old I was when I read it. And I remember that line impressing me so much after everything she had been through, hiding in this little crazy, this little teeny place. I was there last year, and it's really tiny. Nobody will ever see that Anne Frank house again because of the pandemic, because they allow hundreds of people to go into these rooms at the same time, which is amazing. And they'll never do that. I mean, in our lifetimes, they'll never do that again. So I feel fortunate that I was able to go through and experience it. But I remember how emotional I was when she said that about the kindness of people or the goodness of people. And now I feel so discouraged by it, because I always felt people were really good inside. And now I'm not so sure anymore. I don't think people really are good inside anymore. Not after what we've been through in the last few years.
Well, I know Anne's optimism is kind of a difficult thing for kids to understand. When I taught the book, people would often comment on that to kids. How could you be optimistic? But the thing that always really got them is when we went over like post book, and you realize that she almost made it. The camp was liberated not long after she died, I think 2 months, something like that. And she almost made it. And she was not, she wasn't executed. She died most likely, they think, of typhoid because it ran through the camp. In fact, they even mentioned in this film that at some point the Nazis just thought, no point in, using the gas chambers. They're just dying of typhoid anyway. Just let them die. We're not going to take care of them, so they'll just die off on their own, kind of thing. And I mean, to me, that's maybe one of the saddest parts of the story, is what happens after the story's over, which is why it's so poignant, I think, the 5 women's stories, because at least a few of them just kind of made it out because the camp was liberated. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened to them. So. And the second question here is about, and we've talked about this with other films that we've seen. If you've seen the other film, or you've read the book that is based on, like if you read Becoming and then you saw the film, the differences in things, people who have read Anne's diary or seen a film version of some kind, does this film bring more to the book? Like, I would not show this film probably to students if we hadn't read the book. I don't know. I think of it as a supplement, just like the Becoming thing. I think it's a supplement to the book. I don't think it takes the place of the story at all, even though you get some passages and things. Or if you have not read it, do you feel the film told you the essence of her story? Did it make anybody want to read the book? I want to reread the book because I have a feeling it's been so many years that it's going to be a different experience for me this time. And I'm sure there are going to be passages, because it happens in every book I reread in my entire life now. I read passages and go, did I read this book or skim it? Because I don't even remember this part. It happens with movies too. I watch a movie again, I said, I don't know, I don't remember this scene at all. Did we? It's kind of sad. So people who have seen other films or read the book, any reactions on the comparison or how it supplements, or did it add something to the experience? The most common film probably would be The Diary of Anne Frank, which I mentioned later on, is the 1959 film, which did very well and really, really popularized the story and things like that. And yeah, that's a Hollywood version. It's not bad though, but it's a Hollywood version for sure. Book versus movie versus other film versions.
I've seen the play too. There is a play.
Yeah, there's a play.
So
also.
I've seen that too, which is done in one tight, basically on the stage, it's one tight room. Or maybe it's 2 tight rooms. Maybe they show it in 2 rooms.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard for me to be objective because I know the story. So I don't know if I didn't know the story and I watched that film, would I understand the nature of what was happening? I'm not sure. If anybody did not know the story, then they could react to that.
Yeah.
Um,
Carolyn, I think you were saying hello.
I was just going to say, I read the book a long time ago, but I think that the survivors made this, maybe because of my age now, but it made it much more, it made it very, very strong for me.
I mean, the survivor stories, like I said, you know, and some in the Helen Mirren and, you know, some of the other elements, you don't get that from the book. So that's a supplement to the book. And I think that's a good thing. Like if you watch that 59 film, it's pretty much the whole story of the book. It's the kind of thing that, you know, a student will watch the film and try to fake that they read the book type thing. But, you know, this doesn't replace the book in any way, but I think it's a very good supplement to the book, especially for a contemporary young audience. I think it's a good supplement. Other thoughts on that? How many people have seen the film, The Diary of Anne Frank, the black and white 1959 film? Have people seen that? What'd you think of that? Even though it's a Hollywood film, was it good or
for
corny?
me, I mean, I saw it. I was a kid when I saw it the first time.
Yeah.
It blew me away when I was a kid. I mean, there was the story coming to life. And so it wasn't so much Hollywood. It was about those people and what they went through.
I showed the film to students and they really liked it because it gets into her love story with Peter, and, you know, you get to see the people, even though, you know, this is not what Anne looks like and everything. And it is a little Hollywood because it's a little more glamorous. The rooms look a lot bigger in the film than they are in real life. It's hard to get that claustrophobic feeling. There's another interesting little side story. I don't know how many people have ever heard the Audrey Hepburn connection to Anne Frank. So Audrey Hepburn was, you know, lived in the Netherlands, was the same age as Anne Frank, went through the whole period, but did not get taken away to a camp or anything like that, but went through the starvation where people were eating tulip bulbs, you know, for food and things like that. And she was asked by Otto Frank to play Anne in the film version for 1959. And she said she couldn't do it. She said she was so devastated by the book that she could not imagine playing the part. And she also feared that because it was Audrey Hepburn, you know, even though she wasn't the giant star at that point in her life, that it would take away from the story. She thought an unknown should play the part so that you weren't making connections with, you know, it's like you take any character and have Meryl Streep play it, it's Meryl Streep. You know, you can't forget it's Meryl Streep, even though she's incredible and absorbs the role and the accent and everything. It's Meryl Streep. And she didn't think that that would be a good thing for the film. But I thought that was really interesting. I believe she wrote something, I'm not sure it's a whole book, something about the whole experience. And I know she worked really hard on Holocaust projects from the Netherlands.
Well, one thing that that occurred in the film that I thought really resonated was the woman who was the artist, and she drew her experiences. I thought that was and somebody said that the young lady who was the granddaughter of one of the survivors said that she played the violin and that art was the thing that got her through. And I thought that was great. The other thing, and so a lot of the things that involved the younger people was very interesting, because there was one young man who was a grandson, and he had the numbers of his grandparent tattooed on his arm. I thought that was great.
Yeah. Well, and that idea that even though it's distant, you know, if it's your grandparent or something like that, it's part of your history, and you really don't want to forget the history. You want it to go on. And, I always tried, when I taught the book for students to think about that whole historical thing. And I had a lot of students who had grandparents that were either involved in the war or even a few Holocaust survivors at that time. And I tried to make that connection that, you're not so far away from these experiences, but, like we said, at some point there will be no more survivors, just like the World War II survivor, soldiers and things are disappearing. And, who's going to keep telling those stories? Are there children telling the stories and things like that? My father was in World War II, and he really didn't like talking about it. He kept a diary during the war, which you were not allowed to do. But he did, because you weren't allowed to do it because you might write down things about battles, and if it was captured, it would give information. But I have his diary, and I got more from that than I ever got from him. He did not like to talk about a lot of it, and he was on Beach Red, Normandy, D-Day, the whole thing. But it was not an experience he wanted to share too much. And my wife and I, when we watched this film again, she said, she goes, I don't know about you, but I never really talked to my mother even, who lived through this. Her mother would have been about the age of Anne Frank, about, like, what did you know living here in the United States? Did you know what was going on? Were you aware of the Holocaust and everything? Or was it hidden from you? Or was it told in a different way? And I feel like I missed out on some personal history that I could have gotten. So I think that's also an important lesson for kids to realize when they're watching the film, like personal history and connection to historical events. I mean, someday everybody will be telling stories about, the pandemic year. My mother was born in 1918. They thought she would die because of the flu epidemic. She was in Pennsylvania. And they thought her mother would die, so they were going to put her up for adoption. She was actually adopted by her aunt, who she didn't find out that her aunt adopted her until she was like 12 years old, that the person she was calling her aunt was her mother, which is in itself an incredible story. But she would talk about, the flu epidemic, but, of course, she was a baby, so she didn't know it. But I mean, we'll have that story to tell at some point. And, at some point it'll be history, old history. Okay, let's look at another question, watching the clock here. So when I looked at this film first, when I was picking the films, I looked at Rotten Tomatoes, the rating system, and it had a 100% at one point, which is really unusual, maybe because it didn't have a lot of ratings, but it had 100%. And I always look up to see if there's any negatives out there, if anybody disliked the film. There's really not a whole lot on this one. I found one review. But when the book came out and was published, Otto Frank was actually criticized by some people that he was exploiting his daughter in order to get fame and money and that sort of thing. And one of the claims was that the writing was much too good for a 13, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and that he had rewritten it, and that we didn't actually see the real one, or someone had rewritten it, which was something I used to talk to students about, because some kids would say, she's a pretty good writer for 13 years old. She's a good writer. And one of the things that you discover in the film, which I don't think I had ever heard before, was that she heard on the radio, apparently they did listen to the radio there, that the Minister of Education made an appeal for people to bring forward their stories if they had stories of what went on during the period in World War II. So she started to rewrite her journal or diary and write it in more of a novelistic way, not so much as a diary, but with an eye towards it. And she wanted to be a writer. And so Otto Frank always said that the reason he brought it forward, because she always wanted to be a writer. She wanted to be a published writer, and he wanted to fulfill that dream of hers, and that he thought it was a story to be shared. Do you have any sense of exploitation in the diary's publication or any of the adaptations of it? Silence.
I think
Diane.
Yeah, I will say, well, I really enjoyed the film, I'll say number one, and I concur with what everyone has said about it. But I had to say, as I was reminded that this was written by, a 13, 14-year-old, 15-year-old girl, it seemed extraordinary writing to me.
Yes.
But then again, I can't say that I would trust or say that her father rewrote it or someone rewrote it. I mean, she was an extraordinary human being. And I'm glad that this film was done in addition to the predecessors and the books and what have you, because to document the bridge between the survivors and the way that all the elements of the film came together, I thought it was very well done. And I really enjoyed it. I almost didn't want to watch it because I knew it would be sad. And I'm not
Yeah.
that I'm trying to watch comedies all the time or anything, but I'm really glad that you suggested this film and that I watched it because I might have otherwise missed it. So thank you.
And there is a somewhat hopeful
Yeah.
element to it. Not only the end of her diary and what she says, but also in the fact that there were those that survived. There are those that tell the story. There are those that continue to tell the story in the hopes that it won't happen in any form, in any country, because of any group that's an outcast group or, blamed for things. And we know it's happening, in 2020.
Yes.
It's happening. We see it on the news kind of thing. I didn't think it was exploitative, and I didn't know about the until I taught the book. I didn't know that there was actually any criticism or hint at that. But when it talked about in the film that she had done the revision in order to maybe have it become part of the Netherlands radio, I thought, okay, so where's the original diary? Why don't they publish the original diary, like the one that's not so well written, or her first version? I've never seen more than one version of the diary. I mean, you can find early drafts of famous novels and things like that. So what are we reading? Are we reading that, that red diary that she wrote in the first one, or are we reading something else that she wrote? I have to investigate that a little deeper because now that bothers me. Like, which version did we read when we picked up the paperback book of Anne Frank's diary?
Yeah.
So
I think Anne's is a true voice, though, because people have a sense of BS. They can pretty much tell that. The fact that she is speaking to us with as much immediacy now as when she first wrote this, they know something the genuine when they hear it. And I think there's a genuine quality that comes through. And it's not just that, if this was just a dry historical epic that she was giving us, but she speaks to us so much because she talks about her first kiss. She talks about her relationship with her parents. She talks about the things that peeved her off about being trapped in with all these people. And then at the same time, she talks about like the battle going on within herself between hope and despair. You talked about how can young people believe how much hope she had. It's a story for all of us as well. When she talks about how she can see that little bit of blue sky, and how could she be sad under those circumstances when she can still see the sunlight and such? She speaks to all of us in a way that's amazing. And I think that the use of the hashtags was good as well, because it shows that the young woman was asking questions, almost having a dialogue with Anne, because her voice comes across as clear today as if you were actually speaking to her back in 44.
And the other thing about the hashtags, if you're a person who uses them or uses social media, is that you can find communities because of the hashtag. Like if you follow the hashtag Anne Frank, you would find everybody else who has something to say about Anne Frank. Maybe they're visiting the Anne Frank house. Maybe they're at a camp and they're thinking of her. Maybe they're reading the book and they want to know if anybody else is reading the book. So there is a kind of community aspect to social media when it's at its best that I think they were also playing with that idea. I don't know if students watching the film might, try looking at the hashtag Anne Frank to see what's out there. But that would be a possibility. Or you could have students. When I taught in high school, social media wasn't really a big thing. This was pre-2000. So I can't imagine it, but I know that there are teachers who use social media as part of lessons. They'll have students, try to write summaries that are Twitter things so that they're 230 characters. They'll have students follow things, post things. I know teachers who have had students post in social media at authors that they're reading and get responses from the authors commenting on, their book or questions that they had with the book, things like that. So, I mean, there is that aspect to it. Okay, fourth question, last question for us. As the documentary, the film sets out to both educate and present a particular belief and a call to action, which is typical of many documentaries, to educate and sometimes to call to action. This film intends to persuade and remind us in several ways that the horrors of Anne's time are still present today, with refugee camps, prejudices against immigrants and others, dictatorships, and leaders who reach popularity through promoting these beliefs. The filmmakers do not push hard on these connections. Do you think a younger audience might need those connections to current times and their own lives made more explicit? I know that was the point of including Katerina, but do you think it's done strongly enough, or would they need more to really see that the story is very relevant to today? That's a teacher in me question. One of the phrases that was very popular in the 90s with teaching is to stop being the sage on the stage and just be the guide on the side. And I would say this is a film and a book that students should read with a guide on the side, someone who can guide them through the book, add the things, explain the things that don't make sense to them and things like that. I think the film could help you get through the book if you're on your own, but I really think you need somebody who has more knowledge and understanding of it to sort of guide you through. I don't know that students would make those connections to the modern times just based on the film. They might need a little bit more of a push for that. I'm not sure. Anyone? I mean, I don't want to get too political, so we won't bring up any current leaders who have done this sort of thing, but I mean, that's certainly there. You could do that maybe in a classroom, right?
I think you need a guide on the side. I mean, if I think of when I read it, I don't want to tell you all how old I was when I read it, but when I read it, I don't think I understood a quarter of, I mean, I understood what I was reading, but I didn't understand why this was happening and what was happening and why they had to hide. I mean, just that we knew that that the Jews were being persecuted, but we didn't know that other people were being persecuted too. I mean, we didn't know. I mean, I probably still don't know a lot, but I know a heck of a lot more now than I knew when I read the book the first time. Maybe someone to sort of elaborate maybe on some of it.
Okay.
I didn't know till really, really recently, and I'm sure that not everybody knows this, that 3 million of the 6 million that were killed in Poland. I mean, that's like extraordinary. And Poland had a huge amount of Jews. I can't remember the amount now, but I did know at one point. But now today, in today's Poland, there's hardly any Jews there at all. They just never came back. I mean, the population there is just incredibly small. And my girlfriend asked me if I wanted to see Schindler's List 3 years ago. It had its 25th anniversary. And at Radio City Music Hall, they had a reshowing of Schindler's List with Steven Spielberg and I can't think of his name, Liam Neeson, and the one who played who played Gandhi also, what's his name?
Ben Kingsley?
Yeah.
Yes. And so they had all these people as guests after the movie. And little did I know, because I think I saw it on a Friday night or Saturday night, that I was leaving in 2 days to go to Poland. And I didn't know that Schindler's List I didn't know the whole movie took place in Poland. And there I was like 3 days later. I knew it was took place. I figured it took place in Germany, but it didn't. So it was like all these things that you kind of learn, grow as you go or something like that.
Jump in, Ray.
So not just because it's the way I did it, but I think a good order of exposure would be the diary with a guide on the side, because it's very heavy material. But I did not see any movie, but I would like to read the book and then see this film about the book and about this is an addendum to, it's an extension of, it's the parallel things about, it's a modernization of, it would grab more younger people with the social media aspect of it. So again, I like to see things cold. Give me the book, tell me what it's about, and so that I can relate to, and ideally, I think it works well for a child of that age, like in a normal society, in a normal, I don't know, emotional quotient, in a normal educational scenario. The book with a guide at hand, and then this film. And I thought Helen Mirren was great. The 5 women were great. The hashtag was, the social media thing was great. The mixing of archival footage with, I suppose they had, like the film from shooting up at the balcony. I suppose they put it in the newspaper. Who's got film of that wedding that day, perhaps? And then as luck would have it, like, oh, look who's in the balcony. So thank you, y'all.
So one last little concluding thing, like I said, that not a whole lot of negative out there, but I did find one reviewer who wasn't 100% in love with the film, who said that they found the Katerina thing annoying. And I have a feeling that this critic did not know that it was aimed at younger people, that was the target audience for it, because he said, found it distracting, it sort of trivialized the story. But the other thing, which really bothered me, that he had a negative on, he said he didn't buy Helen Mirren's emotional pauses and things, that was not genuine, that was an actress playing a part. And I did not feel that. I thought she genuinely got caught up when she was reading it and things. So I don't know if she was acting. I totally fell for it, but he thought it was acting, and it was sort of trivialized. I don't buy that.
You know what? I believe Helen Mirren whenever she does it. And like you said, it's hard to forget that it's Helen. But she's one of those actresses that I could watch and know that it's both Helen and that character. I believe it's that character. So I believe that she was not faking the sadness, which is like, who doesn't have sadness around this material?
Yeah. And I could see her getting caught up, caught in the throat when she's reading it. Stan, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, this tells you a little about my naivete about social media, because when you posted what movie we were going to see, honestly, I thought it was a number sign, and because I'm not familiar with Twitter at all, so it really didn't take away from the movie, believe me. But I didn't know what was going on, really.
Well, when I first looked at the film, I didn't even notice that there was a hashtag on there, and I think I thought maybe it was a mistake or something like that. And then when I looked up the film, I said, oh, it really is hashtag Anne Frank. And then when you watch the film, it's like, oh, I get it, because she's hashtagging all of her posts Anne Frank. I get it. Okay, so it makes sense, but it's a little confusing. I guess it would also alphabetize you, put you at the top of the list if you alphabetize names of films. Well, maybe that's something too. So on the Helen Mirren, just one other thing. I don't know if anybody's ever watched, there's a series called Documentary Now. I think it's on the Independent Film Channel, IFC. Helen Mirren's the host. They're all fake documentaries. They're made by, basically comedians and things, but they're fake documentaries, but they're made in such a serious, satiric tone. And Helen Mirren is the host of all of them. And she's talking about a documentary that doesn't really exist. And I believe her when she does the introductions. She just has this gravity to her that it sounds genuine, but I think she was truly genuine in that film. Any last thoughts? Otherwise, we're going to say a few words about the future, which no one can
Had
predict.
a nice balance of all its various different attributes. Like you said, the use of the stills, the use of the of Helen Mirren as the narrator and such. One of the things I really liked about it too was it didn't have historical reenactments. When I'm watching a
Oh.
documentary, one of the things that can kind of take me out of it is when they
Yeah.
have a historical reenactment and then you have a bunch of people shuffling along, trying to, you know, do an acting job in terms of what took place. I was pleased that it didn't have that, because that's one of the things that usually takes me right out of a documentary. I don't know if you feel that way, Ken.
Yeah, and they'll even do that with contemporary stories that they just don't have footage. Like a lot of these crime documentaries, true crime ones, they like reenact the crime with actors and things like that. And I understand that they're trying to show you what happened, but you know, it's like those aren't the people, but the people are still alive that they're talking about. I mean, like, I don't quite get how this is going. So, Jill, you want to say something about the future? Make a prediction that might actually come true?
Who knows? Who knows who can predict what in 2020? But we actually, so yeah, we do have classes. We plan to do this again in January for the winter session. So I think the signups are a few weeks before that starts. I'm sure Michelle will be in touch with all of you. We don't know the films that we're going to choose yet. We're going to get a little creative and see what's out there in early January, so that we can make sure it's still on Netflix by the time the class comes around.
Actually, the Joan Didion was a recommendation from somebody in the last session who said, you know, I don't know if you would use this film, but I thought it was a really good film. And so, you know, I looked that one up and it started to look for other author kinds of films. So if anybody has suggestions, you know, you could pass them on to Michelle or Katie or Jill. They could probably
You can
email
always
you.
email me.
It's real simple.
Montclairfilm.org.
Yep, Jill at montclairfilm.org. Really easy. If you say, like, I thought this film on Netflix was terrific, or I'd love to see films about such and such. I dig through all the documentaries that are available on there and look for themes. And, you know, there's a couple of themes that we've thought about, music or the environment, nature, you know, different kinds of things. But, you know, we're open to suggestions.
Yeah. And thank
we're
you.
gonna stick. We're sticking with documentaries. We're sticking with documentaries. So
Thank you. These courses are great.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for all your contributions. It was a great
Thank you. This
discussion.
was great. Otherwise,
Yep.
I never would have watched any of this.
well, that's one of the things.
Enjoy your holidays, whatever form they may take.
Yep.
Thank you. Same to all of you.
Hey,
Thank you
Jennifer,
very
can I
much.
ask you a question before we log off?
Yes, Joyce?
What was the name of that film, that camera club again?
Oh, Essex Photo Club.
Okay, I wrote it down. Do you have to pay to join, or can I go to a couple of them free?
You could go to them for free, but there is a membership fee if you're gonna enter any of the competitions.
I see. Okay, because I wanted to sort of attend it, but I didn't want to pay until I knew what it was about.
Oh yes, go to the website. You can. In fact, on Thursday we're having a meeting, so just go to the website.
Okay, maybe I can go on Thursday. Okay,
Good.
thank you, everybody.